you. Okay, and Eric, why don't you come on up? Eric Savitz, if you've been to a Silicon Dragon event before, you know Eric. Eric is a journalist, and he is at Barron's currently, doing a lot of technology coverage, right, Eric? Okay, good. Is it on? All right.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
All right. So this is nice and friendly. We're going to be up close here. No,
That's
I don't
what
know.
you think.
No, right. Thanks a lot, Eric.
Well, you know, see, now I'm in control. So congratulations on the book, and thanks for the invitation. So one place I want to start, you talked a little bit about how much things have changed since the first book. One thing that we saw with the first generation of large, successful Chinese internet companies, the Baidu's and Tencent and Alibaba, is they've had tremendous success domestically, a little less success penetrating the US market.
That's true.
Can you talk a little bit about what, both A, why that happened, or why it hasn't happened, I guess, if you look at it that way, and then B, whether you think this sort of next wave is likely to make a bigger impact in establishing a beachhead in the US market?
Right. Well, so Baidu is only in China. They did try the Japanese market, but they failed in Japan and they withdrew. So search is a very localized product to begin with, so it's been very tough for them to go global. Now they are getting into AI, and that's a chance for them to spread their wings more into other markets, and they are doing that. With Tencent, with WeChat, it's still mainly in China, although it's filtered over somewhat to those who do business in China. They use WeChat here. But Tencent has largely gotten into the US by investing. And you know, and the same thing with Alibaba, by investing, not really bringing their own platform over, but by investing in startups and tech stars that we have here in Silicon Valley and elsewhere.
So do you think there's a probability that one of the newer plays may have more luck? I mean, Alibaba, in fact, actually built a venture capital arm here and was investing in a lot of companies, and that was not super effective, and Tencent has too. But no one seems to have really generated, particularly in the internet content and commerce space, had a lot of success going from China to the US. I wonder if you think that's going to change.
I do, and in my book I talk about some of the examples of companies that are going global from China. DJI, the drone company, is the world leader. 75% market share from China. Originated in China, invented in China by a Chinese entrepreneur from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, or Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. So that is a made in China company that has gone global. Another one is ByteDance. ByteDance is sometimes referred to as the new B. Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent announced ByteDance.
Well, and you should talk a little bit about what they do, because I'm not sure everyone knows.
Okay, so ByteDance is, in a way, an AI company. But what they do is AI news, AI-powered news with Toutiao, but they also do AI-powered digital entertainment. And so that is TikTok.
That's the part people might know.
Yeah, TikTok they will know, because that one has gone global. The AI news has not gone global. That's a China product. But I think TikTok has really taken off globally. It's just become really, really popular. These crazy, silly little 15-second video apps.
Yeah, it's like the old Vine style videos, very short videos. And it has, that may be the one that crosses over in a meaningful way and becomes a bigger player.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to change the world much, I don't think.
No.
It's not going to, improve the planet really, but it will entertain us, I suppose.
So I think another thing I wanted to drill down on a little bit, and you mentioned this, is that we've gone from an era of copycat startups, very successful ones, but search, e-commerce, travel, all the things that were being done on the US internet got copied and were reproduced in China, and that's not a bad thing. It was a logical thing to do. But now we are starting to see some business models get created in China and then copied here.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk about a couple of those that have happened, and then we'll talk about a few that haven't happened yet.
Okay. Well, the new retail is one that I think is really interesting and that Alibaba has embraced. And it's so much more advanced than what Amazon has. The whole robotics and the delivery system and the facial recognition that is in these supermarkets is all very digitally savvy, and mobile payments that they have as well. So I think that is one area that Amazon is starting to get into with Amazon Go. But Amazon Go is just a little convenience store. Whole Foods is nowhere like their supermarkets that Alibaba has in China. So Amazon has a lot of catch up to do with Alibaba and the new retail. I think another area that I write about in the book is a new kind of commerce company, is social commerce. And again, this is a business model that originated in China by a company that went public in New York called Pinduoduo.
Which has been it's a large cap, $20 or $30 billion company.
Yeah, they did well in raising money in New York. And I think they came out of nowhere. In 3 years' time, revenue shot up. And that guy, the entrepreneur behind that, has Google experience. So some of these people, they can leverage their, great career training at American or international tech companies.
And they're now like the number 2 player, right? They've surpassed JD. Just only Alibaba on their way, right?
Yeah. Yes.
At this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. I mean, I was at 11/11 last year for the Ali Fest, and they were really actually. A lot of people were talking about the rise of this Pinduoduo and how it may be a real big challenger to Alibaba, that it's already number 2 in China. But Alibaba was basically dismissing it. But then Alibaba has actually come out with its own kind of social
Copycat.
commerce model.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it is interesting because there is no U.S. analog yet, so there's sort of entrepreneurs pay attention. It's like an opportunity for somebody to do this, unless Pinduoduo can figure out how to bring it to the U.S. And
it could work. I mean, Groupon worked, but this is more all-encompassing than Groupon was.
So another one that I think is interesting is what happened in bike sharing.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
And that's been mixed, right? Like in terms of the success as a business model.
Yeah, definitely. Bike sharing originated in China, and it went global. And there were a few companies that emerged at the top of that heap of all these companies that got funded. There was a tremendous amount of funding of bike sharing companies in China. OFO was one of them, and another one was Mobike. Mobike got sucked up by Meituan, another Chinese tech company. So this has been happening where the Chinese tech companies are getting bigger and bigger because they're not only investing overseas, they're investing at home too. So OFO didn't make it as a bike sharing company because they overexpanded internationally. Their management was very young and inexperienced.
And they had raised a ton of money, right?
They
Like
did.
They raised, I don't remember the total, but hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, they did. And some of our major venture capital firms were behind OFO.
Yes.
So they
that one has been, there are now a bunch of U.S. companies trying to do the same thing. And you go to any major downtown and there's bikes all over the place. So it is interesting. That's clearly us copying them, which I think is what makes it so interesting.
Lime is a copy. And so the founders of Lime, they know China. Brad Bao worked at, one of the co-founders of Lime, he used to work at Tencent. So he knows China.
So let's talk a little bit about the current environment and how it might impact the success of these companies, both domestically and internationally. So, for example, on the hardware side of the business, with our sort of restrictions on Huawei, there's been an interesting development in China where there's sort of an outbreak of, we'll call it economic nationalism. So people want to buy Huawei products in China. And I wonder whether we're at real risk of kind of damaging our own opportunity in China by being overly aggressive in restrictions.
Yeah, there could be a backlash. And I think we're starting to see this happen already, of what has been termed a splinter net, which I love that term, right? The splinter net. But I think we are going to see with the rollout of 5G how that plays out, where countries are going to have to select the Huawei and ZTE system from China or a more international system. But there is tremendous pushback. The U.S. is push China back, restrict China, hold them back. And I think we're pushing them into a corner, and that China's response is that, okay, we're going to become more reliant on our own technology. And so why should we buy, everything from the U.S.? Why should we depend on them if they're going to treat us like this? And we are pushing them into a corner. I don't think it's good for global innovation. I think the whole Silicon Valley and China relationship has benefited global innovation. And if we see this breakdown, we could see separations of standards and systems, and it wouldn't be good.
So just today, there was a development that was somewhat disturbing. So the U.S. government is threatening to put some capital restrictions on the ability of Americans to invest in Chinese businesses, Chinese equities, and one of the risks would be just wholesale delisting of all the Chinese companies listed on NASDAQ and the NYSE.
Yeah.
So you had quite a sell-off today by almost every Chinese equity that's U.S. listed. I wonder how you feel about that, and how worrisome do you find that for the ability to have free trade between the two sides?
Well, I don't know how much of that is just hot air, and whether there'll be any reality to that talk. But if there is, it would have a huge impact because of all the Chinese companies that have gone public in New York over the years. Just last year, there were 32. So, it's
32 new IPOs last year.
Yes. And I think some companies are looking to Hong Kong that it could favorably impact Hong Kong, that they'll list in Hong Kong. And in fact, two of the companies that I write about in my new book did list in Hong Kong, and they got good valuations out of that too. So you could see that happening. But I'd be interested to know how much were the stocks down on some of these Chinese companies?
Well, when I last looked at it in the middle of the day, some of them were down 5, 6, 7% or more. Alibaba was down at one point, maybe 6%. I don't see where it closed. Might have been worse. And there is this very, tremendous fear about what the administration might do.
Yeah, I mean, I had been hearing rumors and reports that perhaps they would stop new Chinese companies from listing. But now this is much more.
This would be much more serious.
Yeah, much more serious. Yeah.
So a couple of other things I want to touch on. So one of the things that's happened since your last book, that just recently happened, is that Jack Ma announced that he's retiring. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about both the impact that he's had in trying to grow the Chinese internet into a global force, but also the significance to Alibaba that he's stepping away from active involvement in the company.
Oh, sure. Well, look, the whole tech scene in China is much bigger than one man today. So Jack Ma's departure, while as a visionary, we won't have this visionary face out there to look at and to hear from as much as we have in the past, at least representing Alibaba. I think Jack Ma will go on and do other things, maybe in the education sector, for instance, and that would be right for him, I think, because he started his career as a teacher. But this is... China's never had anyone like Jack Ma before. He's the global figurehead for the tech world from China. So in a way, we're losing that. Now, who's going to come up to replace him?
That was my next question, yeah.
That's a big question. I mean, the person who's succeeding Jack Ma is a different personality. He's not somebody who takes the world stage. He's a doer. Jack Ma's personality is he's like an actor. he loves it, right? He loves acting. He loves being
Yes.
out there. And he's great at it. I mean, he's a great communicator.
So do you have any, if you were trying to, if you look at the next generation
Yeah.
of Chinese leaders,
Yeah.
corporate leaders, is there anyone that we should be keeping an eye on that you think has the personality to emerge on the global stage?
I have to think really hard on this one.
He's a tough act to follow.
It's very
Jack
hard
is a
to
tough
think
act
of
to follow.
somebody like that. I know of certain individuals like the guy who's running Xpeng Motors, the Chinese electric vehicle maker. But he sold his business to Alibaba for $4 billion in 2014. So he's got billions and billions of dollars, and he's creating this new electric vehicle company basically through his own fortune. So I think that deserves a lot of, that's very, risk-taking and adventuresome to want to do that, and I think he may succeed in doing it.
So I want to talk a little bit about places where it may be difficult for Chinese entrepreneurs to actually bring their businesses here. So, for example, you talk in the book about areas like facial recognition, where China is ahead of us. That would seem like a very difficult technology to bring to the U.S. market. Talk a little bit about that, and then other places where it feels like we've been surpassed.
Well, facial recognition is an area that has taken off in China, and it's partly because there's not the privacy concerns that we have in the U.S. And so the big brother element of it is not as disturbing to us as it is. It's pretty much accepted in China. Like, screens are everywhere. You come into the airport, your face. You go to the health club, your face. You pay things, your face. So you go out on the street, cameras recording everything. So we're not at that level. I don't think we ever will be. And whether that's good or bad, there can be some positives from facial recognition. There can also be some negatives.
Mm-hmm. What about so they also have a little bit different approach on payments, which talk a little bit about that situation.
So, payments.
Yeah,
okay,
payments.
All right.
At long last, we're talking about payments.
Okay, cash is dead. Email's dead in China. It's all mobile payment. WeChat Pay, Alipay, no credit cards, very few credit cards used, and facial recognition for payment is used as well. So I think just the Apple Pay is no comparison to WeChat Pay or Alipay.
Is there any other U.S. I don't know, Square or PayPal or anybody else who's even close to what you can do with Alipay or WeChat Pay?
You could do peer-to-peer, and you could also do business-to-business with it. So, it's very adaptable. It's also a super app. For instance, WeChat is a super app. You could do messaging, you could do payments, you could do shopping on it, you could play games on it. So it's a super app. That we don't really have here in the U.S. We don't have these super apps. The closest thing we have to it is Uber and Uber Eats. That's the closest thing I can think of.
If you think about opportunities for IPO for other Chinese, now assuming that we solve this problem where they're not going to let them IPO here, who do you think who are a couple of names that, from an investor point of view, we should really be watching for because of maybe the opportunity or just the innovation or names to watch?
Oh yeah, I would put SenseTime at the top of the list in the AI field. It's the #1 unicorn. It's still private, and it's a specialist in speech recognition. So I think I've met the founder and I know some of the investors, and I think it's solid. And I would, since it's still private,
What are the applications? What's it being used for?
What?
What is it being used for?
Well, Look, facial recognition and speech recognition being used for into fintech and into robotics and into machine learning and determining whether someone is loan worthy. These kinds of, it's filtered into many other sectors of the economy. So AI is one of those fields that, you know, overlaps many sectors.
And give me maybe one more that you think is
another
worth
company.
keeping?
Let's see. Well, ByteDance. I mean, it's still privately held too. So I'm highlighting the ones that I think are high IPO potential.
And ByteDance has I mean, I think at their last valuation was like $75 billion.
Yeah, it is.
Like that.
Yeah, they're the highest valued privately owned company, privately financed company in the world from China. And SenseTime is the #1 AI company. So I think I like those two. And they're both very aggressive.
So I do want to talk a little bit more about AI. So Baidu, I think, has taken a very interesting approach here, where they've as you mentioned, they're the leading search engine. They've now other competition in search in China, but they've made a very determined investment in AI, including for autonomous vehicles. Yeah. I wonder how, a couple of years ago at CES, I saw them do a demonstration and gave a talk about their approach, and they were very bold about the idea that they're going to win and beat the Americans. How do you feel about that?
I think I was at the same show that you were at CES. Yeah, they are very bullish on AI. It's interesting because it doesn't appear to be that relevant to search or that requiring the same kind of skills necessarily, but it certainly is a huge sector that can influence many other sectors. And they have gotten into these AI-powered lights and AI-powered speakers, and for the home. And the autonomous driving is for. I've seen their AI car or their autonomous or self-driving car that they have, and I've seen that in shows in China.
Yeah, in fact, at that event, I don't know if you remember this, but they had a live feed from their offices in Beijing, where it was the middle of the night at the time, and they did a kind of a parade of autonomous vehicles of various descriptions. It was actually kind of funny to see, like they're driving around outside their building in the dark. But you could see these small, there were like buses, and there were like utility vehicles, and there were trucks, and they were all autonomously driven. Now, of course, they had a very particular route. They weren't driving all over the place. But the other thing that struck me about that was that Qi Lu, who was, I don't know if he's still there, but he left. He was running the AI business for Baidu. He had worked at Microsoft. He was a well-known person in the tech business. But he made some very bold assertions about what was going to happen, and talked about how they had more support from their government than we had from ours, that they had caught up in terms of technical prowess and engineering talent, and they were multiples bigger than we are in terms of population, and they were going to beat the pants off of us. It was very sobering and aggressive.
It was. I remember it very well. These big, bold graphics all across the stage, and that's in the book too. I recount that whole episode of being a CS and seeing all this. So yeah, so it's been fun. Let's see if there are any questions. Well, okay, right here at the front.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just without wanting to sort of dwell too much specifically on the trade war, how do you see, for instance, DJI, for instance? I think there was a possibility recently, a day or two ago, mentioned that they could be banned in the US, for instance. That's an entire market. What do you see if that's the direction in terms of blockages on sort of some of the AI initiatives or the Alibaba's expansion in the US, even if it's through investments? Because if DJI can't sell in the US, hypothetically, although it's been kind of covered quite seriously 2-3 days ago, that's also a big market. Would they just sort of
Right.
not be global, or just China's big enough? Or?
Well, in the case of DJI, most of their sales are outside of China, so and they're the world leader with a 75% market share from China. So if we ban them here in the U.S., I think the whole market would suffer. But definitely there is a growing distrust of Chinese brands over security issues and spying issues. Now, certainly with Huawei, that is the case. And we're not allowing Huawei into our system, and not allowing U.S. companies, well, there's been a temporary reprieve on that, but allowing American companies to sell to Huawei, things like the Android system and the apps as well, the Google apps. So we are seeing this increasing distrust of Chinese brands. I think it'll be harder and harder for Chinese companies to really catch hold here.
Even on the consumer side?
Oh yeah, on the consumer and business side, both.
Thank you very much. Your first comments were on Chinese companies coming to the U.S. and technology. What about U.S. companies going to China? If you look over the last 20 years, eBay, Amazon, Google, Uber have not done so well. Mm-hmm. But Intel, some of the hardware companies, Apple, mm-hmm. I'd argue Boeing, some other hardware companies who've done very well. Can you comment on that and that phenomena?
Right. Look, American brands, some of our leading American brands have been blocked in China, so there's no way that they could have won the market. But I think U.S. companies as a total have really not done that well in China. And those in the internet and mobile space, and you named some of them already, Uber, Google, Amazon, and eBay have all pretty much failed in China for one reason or another. Others are struggling. Even Apple, their sales, I mean, it's considered the high premium price American brand, right? Well, we all want Apple. I think in the U.S. there's that feeling too. In China there was that feeling too, but now I think there's less of that feeling toward Apple and the iPhone in China. It's not just pricing, it's there are Chinese companies that have come up that offer high quality phones for less price. So, there's a certain law of diminishing returns there.
Hi. In the wake of what's happening here in the U.S. in terms of policy and consumer, mentality towards Chinese companies, where do you see, or what region do you see really being doubled down on or focused on in this, upcoming year or so?
What region geographically?
Yeah, geographically, like outside of the U.S. market.
Outside the U.S.
Yeah.
I
globally.
see. Well, because these U.S. companies we're seeing restrictions of Chinese investment in U.S. companies. Now, I think we're starting to see Alibaba and Tencent and other companies switch to Southeast Asia, or they're going to Israel instead of the U.S., where they want to go where they're welcome. They've invested a great deal of money in our technology titans here in the U.S., but I don't think we're going to continue to see that. In fact, my book has the figures on the plunge in spending and where it is going to Southeast Asia.
Hi.
Oh.
Right here. So with respect to chatbots and conversational AI, how are Chinese companies better or not so better with respect to Google Assistant or Alexa? Or have you seen any companies doing really good innovation in that space?
Like Alexa?
Like Alexa or Google Assistant.
Well, Baidu is in that space.
And
they have a brand called Doers, Dueros, and that's in that same space.
And do you think the capability is better or on the same level?
I would say probably on about the same level.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Eric up here when you get a chance.
Okay, I'm working my way
Okay.
Thank you. So both under the Obama administration and under the Trump administration, the U.S. Trade Representative has asserted that $250 to $500 billion annually of IP theft occurs from China to U.S. assets. Do you think that's overblown? And how do you think that impacts the dynamics of innovation?
Well, you're talking about the trade war.
I'm not talking about the trade war. I'm talking about IP theft from... The trade war is separate, right? Because that has to do with tariffs and currency manipulation. But the assertion is both came out under Obama, came out under Trump. $250 to $500 billion of IP is stolen by China from the U.S. Do you think that's overblown? And how do you think that affects innovation on both sides of the Pacific?
I think it's overstated. We really have not seen the one smoking gun. Huawei continues to defend itself. There have been some lawsuits that have been settled out of court, for instance, involving Huawei. And we do see and hear of incidents of the stealing, even in the electric vehicle space here in Silicon Valley, Tesla suing engineers who left Tesla to go work for a Chinese electric vehicle maker. But look, I think the whole IP theft issue has been overstated. I think China has developed more respect for IP protection because they have developed their own innovations. And so we are starting to see this new respect. And China is the world's second largest patent filer, right behind the US. Really, really very close in terms of the numbers.
Thanks. What do you think the end game is on China embedding government officials into companies?
Embedding?
Well, they're talking about
embedding,
putting
embedding, I see,
embedding.
okay, yeah. Yeah, you know, that's being talked about more and more today. You're not the, I've been asked that question a couple times out on the media tour, yeah. Yeah, so I think we are seeing that. We are hearing of party officials attending company meetings and knowing what's going on. I have heard that maybe they would take board seats of some of these tech titans, because I think that there's almost like a power struggle going on between these tech titans and the government. Like, who's going to have the biggest voice out here? And so that's playing out right now. This is the last question, because we move on to our venture capital panel.
On the topic of speech recognition, I want to
Yeah.
raise a name that might have slipped your mind.
Okay.
Because I think on Chinese speech recognition, Baidu and the other company called iFlyTech
Yes.
in China, they're probably better than any other high-tech company. But on the English side, then probably Baidu and iFlyTech may not be as good as Alexa or Google Assistant.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to mention that because of Baidu's collecting so much data from smartphone, because
Right.
they tend to let
Right.
smartphone manufacturing like Huawei or Oppo use their technology for free, so they collect lots of samples. They have the best written input recognition or speech recognition for Chinese. So once they launch the smart speaker, they now I just saw recently, they now become number 2 globally, just behind Amazon, just passing Google, because of they have the Cell Duo, I think,
Right.
for the voice assistant on the smart speaker.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you all for your great questions. And let's thank Eric for doing a great job of quizzing me here.
Thank you.